Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here with another video guide. This time I'm going to be going over the Caldari Navy Hookbill and the Vigil fleet issue. At least on a surface level, these ships probably don't seem to have as much in common as the last pairing of ships that I did. After all, one is shield, one is armor, one uses only rockets for its damage, and the other uses an incredibly mixed set of weapons. But they have a surprising similarity in the fact that they both rely on range control. The first ship I want to talk about is the Caldari Navy Hookbill. In solo PvP, you normally see this ship fit with an armor tank, to make use of its copious mid-slots for an even more control-focused build than the one that I run. However, I found that running that fit really constrained my target choices, as I couldn't engage anything that didn't use turrets, and seeing as the Tristan and the Mollusk Navy issue are really common ships right now, I came up with this modification of the basic idea of the fit. So, rather than feathering right at the edge of my range against unprepared foes, I flipped the expected fit on its head and made the Caldari Navy Hookbill into quite a nice shield brawler. The scram and double web means that you can really easily apply rage rockets, and the extra load that you've freed up by not having an armor tank means that you can fit an extra ballistic control unit, giving you tons of damage. And that damage, combined with the strong control of the double webs, can help you to pick apart smaller groups of frigates with relative ease. For example, here I was able to take the Mollusk Navy issue into half structure before its friend could even arrive, which let me get off all of my rep charges before the Republic fleet firetail had a chance to start volleying through, which left me with plenty of tank for the last half of the fight. This next fight was a little more challenging for me, as rather than having enemies warp into me, I was warping into them, meaning that whilst I did have perfect information, they could decide the starting ranges of the fight. Fortunately, however, the people who I was fighting did not take advantage of this opportunity, leaving their Kestrel very close to the warp-in spot, that was likely to have less tank than the breach run grid. So I put as much burst DPS down on them as I possibly could, to minimise the incoming DPS from the fight, which in general is a good rule no matter what type of engagement you're taking, as despite the presence of a medium ancillary shield booster, you should really treat the Caldari Navy Hookbill as if it is a passive tank ship as opposed to an active one, as unlike with an armor rep, you can't reliably gain more EHP during the fight through it, and close to half your EHP is still in your hull. The one type of enemy you'll want to avoid engaging in this fit is someone who is already set up in a Plex and has better range than you, as the Caldari Navy Hookbill might have a lot of range control, but it is not naturally fast, making it very vulnerable to classic kiting without the possibility of getting off a good slingshot. And speaking of kiting, that's a perfect segue into the second ship we're going to look at. The Vigil fleet issue is another of the Navy E-War frigates that were recently added to the game, which gets a bonus to web range. This, combined with a bonus to weapon systems, which can apply huge DPS from anywhere within that bonused web range, and a very strong base speed, lets you punish anyone who doesn't have the speed or the range to handle you. This is especially true for close-range frigates like the Incursus, which simply fall apart under the firepower of the Vigil fleet issue. All you really need to do versus these type of frigates is orbit them at 12k, remember to heat your guns to burn through their reps, and keep a very watchful eye on D-scan to make sure you're not being baited. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that if you do end up getting webbed, make sure to heat your Afterburner, as the speed differential from that plus your two webs should let you get to a safe spot where you can properly hold them at arm's length and beat them to death. One pitfall to walk into when flying the Vigil fleet issue, however, is engaging typical fits that happen to have the same or greater range than you. For example, the Beam Tormentor, popularized by a certain Lord Darklight, can, with the aid of links, both approach you in speed and keep a web on you to stop you from getting under its guns. So, whilst you might do a little more damage, it can still be just a little too close for comfort. As such, you're generally better off staying outside of plexes in the VFI, and using your D-scan to find targets that are vulnerable to your level of control, as unlike with the Caldari Navy Hookbill, it's more important that you find the right fight as opposed to start the fight in the right way. The next fight I found was against a pair of Punishers in a Plex. Try saying that 5 times fast. However, these Punishers weren't fit in the way that I'd expected them to be, as Punishers are typically fit with an Afterburner and with a very heavy armor tank that makes them sluggish and easy to control, whereas these Punishers were fit with MWDs, letting them very easily catch up to me and try and hold tackle, and leaving me relatively unable to mitigate enough damage that my tank would be able to hold against them. So, after a little bit of time trying to burn through them with rage missiles, and realizing that they were way too tanky for that to be a possibility, I started looking for the best possible way out. Analyzing a fight like this as it's going on is one of the most important ways that you can stop yourself losing ships unnecessarily, as a lot of ships have ways to disengage from fights. For example, here I knew that my most important asset was going to be the fact that I had cap stability, whereas my enemies did not. As such, I juggled my webs back and forth between the two, pushing one away and forcing it to burn through a lot of its cap to try and keep up, before quickly switching to the next as it came within tackle range. All the while figuring out where I could possibly align myself to that would give me a safe warp out, and trying to avoid burning out any crucial modules. You can use this kind of evaluation of your strengths versus the opponents to escape from quite a lot of fights that aren't as advantageous as were initially anticipated. Just look at what you can control that your opponents can't and try and exploit it as much as possible to put enough range between you and them, or stopping them from tackling you through things like newts or ECM drones. After all, living through a fight that you would have lost if you'd stayed means you get to fight even more fights in the future. And if fighting more fights is cowardly, then goddammit, I don't want to be brave. So, when looking at those previous fights, you might not have understood quite why I enjoy flying the Vigil Fleet issue, as it doesn't seem to really offer that much above what the Caldari Navy Hookbill does, seeing as they share some similarities in how they want to control range. But this fight, more than anything, really exemplifies what I enjoy doing with the VFI, and that's shooting upper class into the cruisers. All the things that make it so effective against ships like the Incursus work exactly the same against cruisers, with the added benefit of being able to easily get under their guns, sometimes even through a web. After all, nothing beats being the frigate menace that is so despised by the rest of EVE. The first thing to take care of, however, is making sure that you aren't going to die immediately. And in general, when you're shooting upper class, the biggest threat to you is likely to be the complement of drones that the enemy carries. For example, here the Stabber Fleet issue had a flight of 2 mediums and 3 smalls. So I keep a web on the main target to ensure that he can't move away from me, whilst transferring one web over to his drones and then putting all of my damage onto it to clear them off, before they can cost me too many charges of my Ancillary rep, just in case I land in hot water and need to rep myself out of a bad situation. After successfully defanging the cruiser, knowing that given the amount of drones that it put out, it can't have any spare, I move my attention to the next biggest threat I've got to deal with, which is the Stabber Fleet issue's guns. So I stay right at the most awkward possible spot for him, staying far enough away that I'm forcing him to use Barrage, which carries with it a tracking penalty, without going far enough away from him that the tracking penalty is then mitigated by my own range. As you can see, this meant that he was simply unable to track me. As such, all I had to do was pay close attention to his attempts to slingshot me, and load rage rockets and hope that he died before my ammo supply ran out. Unfortunately, here is where I forgot that I'd set my graphics to complete potato mode due to an earlier fleet fight. So, whilst I might have tried to get that cinematic shot, it unfortunately did not come across very well. So, feel free to suggest ships that I should try for my next little video, and as always, fly smart.